So real quickly, let me just introduce myself. My name is Dennis Yang. I am the CEO of Udemy, and I've got a prepared presentation here, and we're going to make sure, I know we're running a little bit behind, but I want to make sure we have some time to answer any questions that you guys may have at the end as well, okay? So what I wanted to talk to you about today was a series of big changes that we're seeing in the world and what they mean for, from our perspective in terms of the world of work as well as the world of learning, okay? But before we do that, let me get started by talking about three examples, three folks, Harsh, Sam, and Nikki here, and millions of other people that we are currently working with who are experimenting with a new way of learning. And you would think that because they have very different backgrounds, they come from different places, had different levels of access to education, that they would want different things. But in reality, what we find over and over again is when we talk about education, we find that people over and over again, they really want one thing. What they really want is a pathway to upward mobility. They want to be able to pursue a better life for themselves. And you know, that's probably makes a lot of sense for most of us, and we have to think to ourselves, well, how do we do that? What are some of the things that are changing that allow for this to happen? And from our perspective, it starts with technology, okay? Because technology, more than anything else, it's cutting across borders, it's cutting across industries, and it's changing faster than ever before. And that's what allows us to do this. And technology is really the catalyst for change across three different areas. The first is the world that we live in, the second is the world that we work in, and the third is the world that we learn in. So I'm going to cover all three of these. First, the world that we live in. What's changing? Well, first of all, I think we all recognize that we now live in a world of extraordinary access and choice. If you think about it, this device is now pretty much the remote control of all of our lives. How many taps and how many swipes does it take to summon anything that you want? Not that many, right? We also talk about the pace of change. We also talk about how quickly things are changing. So I'll give you a couple real-life examples here. So these are three seminal events in some ways. The first one is invention of the telephone. It took 75 years for the telephone to reach 100 million people. Then you had the internet. It took only 7 years for that to reach 100 million people. And then maybe less seminal would be the Candy Crush Saga game, which is built on the mobile revolution. That took only just a little over a year to reach 100 million people. So we can see things change faster and faster, are being adopted faster and faster. So from the perspective of the world that you work in, think of it if you're a business or an employee. How do you keep up? What do you do? Well, the truth is it's actually pretty hard. 65% of grade school kids will have jobs that don't even yet exist. So think about that. How do we possibly prepare for a future when we can't predict a future? That's quite difficult. So let's take a real-life example here. Let's say you work in marketing and you finished your last bit of formal education 15 years ago. So you're a marketing manager. You come out of school. The internet was just taken off, so then you had to become a digital media expert. And then Facebook was born, so then you had to become a social media expert. Then you had the mobile revolution. Now you're a mobile expert. And who knows, a year or two from now, you'll be a virtual reality or an augmented reality expert. You're going to have to factor all those things in. You couple this with the fact that the average tenure of a job, especially for the younger generations, is getting compressed. You can see that things change faster than ever before. Okay, so moving on to the world that we learn in. We've talked a little bit about what's happening in the world that we live in, the world that we work in, all these changes. And you would think that these changes would also translate into the world that we learn in. But is that true? Raise your hand if this looks familiar to you. I would argue that traditional education is trying to keep up, but it's fallen behind. And I think it's time now to reframe how we think about this. How do we think about providing upward mobility through access and choice? That's what we need to do. And it starts with the possibility of the belief that everyone has something to offer. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is within a marketplace structure, the underlying premise is that everyone has something to offer. And by that, I mean any expert, everyday practitioner, author, blogger, speaker, or industry executive or faculty member can teach a course about the practical skills that they have learned throughout their lives. Because the reality of it is, most of the practical knowledge and skills that people have still in our heads. Can't be found on a Google search engine. It can't be found anywhere else. How do we get people to come out and share that information? So what we're fundamentally doing is redefining what it means to be an instructor or teacher and redefining what it means to be a student. Okay? So let's talk about each sides of these. Let's talk about the student. The first thing that we're big believers in is this notion of lifelong learning. And that's this concept that regardless of whether or not you're lucky enough to have a degree or diploma, you need to continue to learn. Okay? We're all living longer. The world is changing faster. We're having more jobs. You need to continue to keep up. Raise your hand if you've ever had the experience where you had a boss ask you to do something and you just thought to yourself, I have no idea. I certainly didn't know that in school, and I don't even think they teach that in school today. Certainly happened to me. I'll give you a personal example. A couple years ago, I was taking an online course around media training, and I wish I had taken it a little bit earlier because I had one of those experiences where I was lucky enough to go get interviewed on TV. It was on Bloomberg, and it wasn't a single interview, one-on-one. It was sort of like a group interview. And I remember actually when I was taking the course in lecture 3, they talked about, like, hey, if you're in a group interview, one of the things that you don't want to do is actually make eye contact with every single person, because when they're filming you, it just makes your head look like it's on a swivel. And sure enough, that's what I look like. In any case, I mean, that's a perfect example. There's so many different things, some of these practical skills that you wish you had learned in school, but you just didn't. And I don't know if they will ever be taught for that matter. So today, my company, Udemy, is actually working with a lot of these lifelong learners. I'll just give you a quick snapshot of who they are. By and large, they're working adult professionals. They come from all over the world. We've got students from over 190 different countries. They skew a little bit younger, but we expect that to smooth out as the awareness of online learning for these practical skills continues to grow. Okay, let's flip over to the other side, the experts. Again, we want to get all the everyday practitioners, industry executives, author, blogger, speaker, faculty members, or just teachers to come out to share their knowledge, because it's that diversity of teaching, the diversity of content, which ultimately provides that access and choice for our students. So whether you're teaching about business, health and wellness, software programming, I mean, the list can go on and on. I'll give you one quick example. I was speaking to one of our support staff recently. They had a really funny interaction with one of our students who said to them, you know what, there are really just 2 things I've always wanted to learn. I've always wanted to learn data structures and dance. And I thought to myself, well, of course, that makes total sense. But the reality of it is, where else could you go to do that? A marketplace environment can support that, but many other places cannot. So it's hard to predict what it is that people will want to learn going forward. But it's not just any content topic, content category. It's also being taught in many different languages, where the instructor or the teacher is going to be speaking the same language and using the same cultural cues. It's going to be teaching with different pedagogical styles. These courses can expand and scale massively. It's going to be teaching about breaking content, breaking topics, as well as more evergreen topics. So it's really a combination of many different things. And the marketplace itself, when you operate one, it can be very self-sustaining. So how it works is students come in, they interact directly with instructors who are teaching there. And when they do that, they pay for courses. They pay for courses for the instructors. Instructors take those earnings. They reinvest in those earnings into their courses and make them higher quality. They also end up attracting more students, and more students attracts more instructors, which ultimately attract more students. So it goes round and round. So let me go back to Harsh, Sam, and Nikki, and again, the millions of others around the world who want this pathway to upward mobility. What do we do about them? I think it's time now that we reimagine and take a new approach to education that focuses on open access and choice. My belief is that a marketplace for teaching and learning is the way to do that. Okay, so that is all I had here, and I'm realizing that half the people probably just missed it, so come on in, first of all. Come on in. There's plenty of room up here. You guys want to grab a seat? Okay. All right, fantastic. So I think we're going to have the liberty of hopefully going over for maybe 10 minutes or so. So why don't I real quickly open it up for questions? Who's got a question for me? Yes?
How do you ensure quality of teaching in the marketplace?
That's a great question. So her question is, how do we ensure quality of teaching, and ultimately, how do you curate the content? So we do it in 3 different ways. The third one is the most important, but let me cover the first 2 first. The first is we do review and approve all the courses that come onto the site, but we do it primarily from an instructional design perspective, production quality standpoint, and more of a completeness standpoint. Because in our minds, it's very difficult to have a single body of credit content in the same way that has been done in the past. And there's so much diversity of content, so many different styles of teaching in different languages, so it's hard to do as a single body. The second is we do have a peer instructor review where we have tens of thousands of instructors who work with each other, and they can put up their test lectures, and they can share feedback on it with each other on how they're doing. But the most important piece, that third piece, is around the student community. The students are ultimately the ones, they are the arbiters that decide whether or not this is good teaching, this is good content. And we track that through ratings, reviews, the data underlying their engagement. Like as an example, the % increase in course minutes consumed over a 7-day rolling period. We take all that feedback, and what we do with it is we curate the site based on search, based on quality, or I call it student happiness. So if students are saying, we really think this instructor in this course is great, what happens is that course rises up higher up in the search ranking. So it kind of goes along with that old joke, what's the most deserted place on the planet? It's the third page of the Google search results, right? Nobody ever clicks over to the third page. So in the same way, when you have many different courses being taught of similar topics, we try to take the ones that the students are saying this is the most valuable and the best course and put that up to the top. Yes?
I know there must be a big variation, but do you know roughly how long it takes to create a course for a teacher?
Typically, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks up front to create a course. There is ongoing student interaction throughout, but most of the work is more done up front. Yes. Better turn to the other side. Other questions? Yes?
Have you ever considered how to integrate your marketplace model with traditional schooling?
Yeah, so the question is, have we ever thought about integrating our marketplace model with traditional schooling? So the answer is yes. We formally don't do it. What we find, quite honestly, is sort of the biggest impediment or the barrier is more from a cultural standpoint. So the way that the speed at which our instructors and students are moving, since they're on a global basis, instructors and students everywhere around the world, to go work with a school that's typically going to take a little bit longer to engage on a formal basis. There's sort of oil and water. What we do find is independent teachers who work at traditional academic institutions, by all means, they work with us on their own. But it's a lot harder to get faculty senate or administration to buy in on a more formal basis. So we just leave it up to individual instructors to do that. Great question. Yes?
Firstly, thank you for all that you're doing.
You're very welcome.
And I'd like to ask you a challenging question.
Sure.
Fareed Zakaria talked about these 2 worlds that we see: one access to education and access to capital, and the other one doesn't have. Do you see online learning close this gap? Could this be?
Sure. So the question is, there's a world that has access to education, there's a world that has access to capital, but how do you close that divide for those that do and those that don't, right? Did I rephrase that right?
Yes.
Okay. So from my perspective, what we're trying to do is actually make access as available as possible. But that still leaves one other problem that we haven't quite solved yet. The problem that we haven't quite solved is something that I would call the ambition gap, which is we are going to reach a point where everyone will have access to everything. It's going to be affordable. It's going to be usable. But if you don't have the motivation, what do, right? And that's something we haven't solved yet, because engagement in learning, quite honestly, it's difficult. From a category standpoint, it's an aspirational thing. It's a little bit like going to the gym to exercise. Would you rather play a mobile game, or would you rather go learn something? A lot of people would probably play the mobile game. So even though we make things as accessible as possible and as affordable as possible, it doesn't necessarily mean that people will engage in that. And that is still a fundamental challenge that I think is everybody within the sector is trying to deal with. It's a good question. Yes. Other questions?
Yeah, I have I'm behind you.
Okay, there you are.
I have a question. I'm working and living in Kuwait, and one of the problems that we have is getting the government to recognize online education. What are you doing, and what types of barriers are you reaching in this part of the world?
Sure.
Any suggestions for that?
Yeah, so there are a couple things. One is if the question is fundamentally about recognition of the value of online education, I think that's true kind of throughout. Different cultures have different biases, some stronger than others, around the value of it and sort of the efficacy of it. I think the reality of, maybe there are two important pieces. One is I think we all need to face up to the fact that not everyone has access to a great on-campus physical experience. For those whose alternative is literally nothing, what do we provide to them? How do we bridge time and space by bringing instructors and content to them, regardless of whether or not we have these personal beliefs of is it effective or is it not? So that's the first piece. The second piece is we generally believe that we're moving to a world that will be competency-based, where anyone can get assessed for what they know without having a formal signal. So having formal signals, whether it's a branded degree or certificate, those are all still valuable. But if you think about and fast forward the world going forward, how valuable will they truly be? And if you take the tip of the spear as an example, which is in technology and different technology jobs, the chances of somebody, regardless of whether or not they have a degree or a high-end certificate or some sort of signal, going into an interview and getting that job, if they don't know what they're doing, is quite slim. Mind you, if you did fool the interviewer and you were able to get that job, again, perhaps based off of the fancy credential that you have, how many days within that job of sitting there and coding would it take before somebody figured out, you actually don't know what you're doing? It doesn't take long. So I think you'll see that playing out through jobs and roles and other skills, where it becomes so much easier to assess and showcase what it is that you know, regardless of where you receive that education. Other questions? Yes?
Thank you very much. I'm from Obican Education in Saudi Arabia. Just a quick question, again, linking employment place with the education. We hear and see a lot regarding reform in education and getting education up to speed for the requirement within the industry. But all along, other than STEM and other than certain aspects, we're not seeing a lot of contribution from industry in terms of what are they specifically looking for in terms of making that change within the education, or has there been some work in this regard in terms of getting the employers on board into the reform of education?
Sure. Yeah, so that's actually a great question, and it's honestly, it's an unexplored area, because the reality of it is a lot of businesses, they have no idea either. So first of all, you all have taken some amount of corporate training, I assume. You go into your company, there's some compliance.
Absolutely, yes.
And it's probably some of the worst things that you've ever seen, right? I mean, you compare your experience from corporate training relative to a consumer experience, it's night and day. So in a lot of ways, corporate companies are really falling behind in terms of understanding what it is that they need to do, even to keep their own employees trained and up to speed. There is absolutely a gap, and I've seen a bunch of different studies where it shows how chief academic officers and CEOs do not see eye to eye in terms of who's doing what, whereas on the university side and the education side, they feel like the vast majority believe that they're properly preparing their graduates for the workforce. And on the flip side, from a company's perspective, this is absolutely not the case.
Could we learn a lesson from those who get a job, excel in a job, in terms of what skill sets those particular graduates, for example, would have versus the mass education reform and the mass education that we're doing? I mean, typically the employers are looking for good institutions, degrees that are diversified social communicative skills as being much more valuable and pliable. A student who is able to adapt is the skill set that employers would look for. While when we're talking about education reform, I mean, I come from both sides, so I fear that we focus too much on the academia or STEM, while I think majority of employers are looking for skill sets that enable students to learn on their own.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I completely agree with that last point, which is when we talk to employers, the most valuable skill that they ask for over and over again is the ability for someone to learn something new. Because they can't predict 5 years from now, this is what your job is going to entail. It's impossible. So it's really more of those foundational skills. So how do we get education reform focused on building those foundational skills? Because, again, at the young age that you finish your formal bit of education does not mean you stop learning. And by the way, there is this gap that still exists today between what you learn in formal education and when you enter in a workforce, the practical skills that you wish you had learned and known about. Yes?
In this model, do you see standards for assessment disappearing, or do you see new standards evolving all the time?
Yeah, so great question. So the question is around standards of assessment. Do we see old ones? Do we see new ones? I think we'll see a combination. I think there are definitely some established third-party ones that already exist, but because there's so many new skills that are being generated, there's going to have to be some new ones as well. So, I'll give you an example. Let's go back to the marketing example. This year's hottest digital marketing course could be something around how to optimize ad campaigns on Twitter. Next year, it could be something around how to optimize ad campaigns on Snapchat or WeChat. We don't know what it's going to be in what language. So it's hard to really predict that, so you have to be a little bit fluid. But there are definitely some pieces around there that have been around for a while that should stay the same.
Here.
Oh, there you are.
Most people talk about online education, and the question usually would be where the online education start and how to make it more effectively. But I'll have a different type of question, actually it's reversed. Where does the online education stop or doesn't work?
Where does it, so explain to me what do you mean by where does it stop?
Because we are all promoting from the face-to-face, person-to-person to online, so more people can do it. As the guest speaker talked, the Yale professor, his student could be 32 years, could be 10,000.
Sure.
But just one online course could be 1 million. So that's the trend.
Yes.
But my question is, not everybody can be benefit from online because there are drawbacks, there are fundamental things that may not have it, not prepared. So sometimes it doesn't work.
Yes.
So my question is actually, how do we prepare then so that we can prevent the failure or it doesn't work?
Sure.
So that's my question.
So that's a great question, and it's a difficult one. Some of it goes back to what I was talking about earlier around the ambition gap, which is just because you make it available doesn't mean people will engage. I mean, the highly motivated knowledge seekers will absolutely do well, and they'll execute, and they'll learn something. But there are a lot of folks who don't. What about the remedial folks? And in a lot of ways, where we are in this journey is at the very beginning, because the science of online education is quite new. If you think about it, in a marketplace, a lot of what we focus on for students is, if you're interested in learning about this topic, you'd also be interested in learning about this topic. I'll tell you what would be much more interesting. Students that learned well from this type of instructor and this type of pedagogy also learn well from this other instructor, irrespective of the content. The nice thing is we are now aggregating, because there's so much teaching and learning happening in one central place, we're now aggregating more data around what it is that people, or how it is that people teach and learn in a single spot than ever before. And we should be able to unpack that and learn from it. So,
Thank you.
yep.
I have a question.
Yes.
What are the underlying technologies you're using to facilitate this marketplace?
Okay, so the question is around the underlying technologies. You know, there's actually an incredible amount of data science that goes on behind it. So there's a lot of data-oriented technology. There's a fair amount of, actually, before I move off of that, and that goes to the matching primarily. So when you have such a diversity of content, you know, for instance, in our world, we've got 40,000 courses being taught in 80 different languages, and we're adding thousands of courses every month. So we have the challenge of, if you are a student, you come onto the site, oh my gosh, which way do I go? What do I do? And we use all that data to try to drive people to things that we believe are useful for them. We also use a lot of technology to increase and improve both the teaching experience as well as the student learning experience. And there is an endless amount of work to be done there. Depending on the specific teaching vertical, like software programming versus something in, say, business, we may have different capabilities for the platform. So the list is quite long, actually.
I'd be interested in that.
Okay, great. All right, maybe time for one more question.
Mr. Yang, if you're looking at your ideal school, because the question was put out there in the plenary session, would it be to take the online learning and individualize the learning of each student in that room, but have a teacher as the facilitator there for the soft skills or the foundation skills that we've been talking about? Would that be what you would see as an ideal school setting at this point?
I don't know that there is one single model. I mean, certainly we have instructors who are lighter touch with their students, and then we definitely have instructors and students who likewise want a heavier interaction and do that online, whether it's through our platform or sometimes they might go over Skype as an example. They might take it off the platform. Either way, what we want to do is be able to support and facilitate the learning and teaching that happens across geographies. But because time and time again, what we see is instructors and teachers love the fact that they can reach students everywhere in the world. They can wake up in the morning and realize, oh my gosh, I've got all these new students from all over the world. They want to interact with me. They want to learn from me. It is an incredibly rewarding experience for them. So, okay, I think we're out of time here. So I appreciate you all coming out. Thank you.